The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. "Congratulations on your final payment," it read. I stared at my laptop screen, a strange mix of pride and exhaustion washing over me. After 3 years of aggressive payments, budget cuts, and countless overtime hours, I had finally paid off Alex's $80,000 debt. I smiled as I imagined his face when I showed him the confirmation that evening. I closed my laptop and checked my watch. I had just enough time to pick up his favorite wine and prepare a celebration dinner before he got home. As I gathered my purse and keys, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "Call me ASAP, it's about Alex." I never made it to the store that day. Instead, I learned that my husband of 8 years, the man whose debt I had just finished paying off, had been having an affair with his coworker for the past 6 months. And they were planning to move in together next week. What he didn't know was that karma had already set its wheels in motion, and I had front row seats to watch it unfold. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Morgan Winters seemed like the perfect man when I met him at a charity gala in Chicago 7 years ago. Charismatic, ambitious, with a smile that made everyone in the room feel special. I was 28, working as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm, cautious with money and career-focused. Morgan worked in architectural design, creating beautiful spaces with apparent, effortless creativity. "You're the most interesting person here," he told me that night, as we stood by the champagne fountain. "Everyone else is talking about donations and tax write-offs, but you're discussing sustainable investment in affordable housing." I blushed, unused to such focused attention. "It's just what I do for work." "It's passionate," he countered. "And passion is rare." We married 18 months later in a modest ceremony that still managed to look elegant, mostly due to Morgan's exquisite taste and design connections. Our wedding photos showed a radiant couple, Morgan in his tailored suit and me in a vintage-inspired dress, both of us beaming with the certainty that we had found our perfect match. What those photos didn't show was the conversation we'd had 3 days before the wedding, when Morgan finally came clean about his financial situation. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant as we sat on our apartment balcony. "I have some debt." Some debt turned out to be $80,000, student loans from his architecture degree, credit cards he'd maxed out, launching his career, and a personal loan from a situation he seemed reluctant to explain fully. I was shocked, having been raised in a family where debt was considered almost shameful. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my stomach nodding. "I was afraid you wouldn't marry me," he admitted, eyes downcast. "I know how you feel about financial responsibility." The irony was that if he'd told me earlier, I wouldn't have minded. We could have created a plan together. It was the concealment that hurt. The realization that he'd hidden something so significant until I was emotionally invested and wedding plans were finalized. But I loved him, and I believed in us. "We'll figure it out together," I promised, taking his hand. Morgan lifted my fingers to his lips. "This is why you're extraordinary, Eliza. You see solutions where others see problems." The first 2 years of marriage unfolded like a carefully curated Instagram feed. Beautiful on the surface, with careful filtering of reality. We bought a modest townhouse in a neighborhood Morgan declared was up and coming. I continued working at my firm, where I had recently been promoted to senior analyst. Morgan joined a boutique architectural firm specializing in commercial renovations. Our life looked perfect from the outside. Morgan designed our home with impeccable taste, mid-century furniture blended with contemporary art and vintage accessories. We hosted dinner parties where he charmed our guests with stories and perfectly paired wines. For anniversaries and birthdays, he gave me thoughtful artistic gifts, a handcrafted jewelry box, a painting from a local artist he discovered. What our friends didn't see was the financial reality behind the scenes. Morgan's salary at the boutique firm was modest, especially compared to what some of his college classmates made at larger companies. But he insisted the creative freedom was worth it, that he was building a reputation that would eventually lead to his own firm. "It's an investment in my future. Our future," he would say whenever I expressed concern about our finances. Meanwhile, his debt loomed over us like a shadow. The minimum payments alone ate a significant portion of our monthly budget. Interest accumulated faster than we could pay it down. After 6 months of watching this cycle, I knew something had to change. "Let me handle the finances," I suggested, one night over dinner. "It's what I do professionally. I can create a structured payment plan." Morgan looked relieved. "You wouldn't mind? I hate looking at all those numbers. They just stress me out." "I don't mind," I said, though part of me wondered why an architect, whose job involved precise measurements and budgets, claimed to be so intimidated by personal finance. I spent the next weekend creating a comprehensive financial plan. I consolidated his high-interest credit cards, negotiated better terms on his personal loan, and created a budget that would allow us to tackle the debt systematically. The plan required sacrifices, fewer dinners out, more modest vacations, tighter control on spontaneous purchases. Morgan agreed to everything enthusiastically. "You're brilliant at this, Eliza. I'd be lost without you." His appreciation made the extra work feel worthwhile. I began managing everything, tracking expenses, paying bills, monitoring credit scores, scheduling payments. I set up a separate account where I transferred money for debt payments, sometimes supplementing it from my personal savings when there wasn't quite enough. For the first year, Morgan seemed to respect our new financial boundaries. He checked with me before making large purchases, brought home lunch instead of eating out with colleagues, and suggested free activities for weekends. I began to hope we were making real progress. Then came the opportunities. David invited me to join his golf club, he announced one evening, eyes bright with excitement. "It's where all the top commercial developers hang out. The networking potential is incredible. The membership fee was $5,000 annually. We can't afford that right now," I said gently. "Maybe in a few years when the debt is more manageable?" Morgan's enthusiasm dimmed. "This is about investment in relationships, Eliza. These connections could lead to major clients." I suggested alternatives, professional associations with more reasonable fees, industry events, even offering to host networking dinners at our home. But Morgan had set his heart on the golf club. "Maybe I could take on some consulting work," I offered, hating to see his disappointment. "Just temporarily, to cover the membership." His face brightened immediately. "You do that? You're amazing. Eliza, I promise this will pay off for both of us." I took on a side project analyzing investment opportunities for a former colleague's startup. The extra 20 hours a week were exhausting on top of my full-time job, but Morgan's gratitude and his stories of promising connections made on the golf course made it seem worthwhile. 6 months later, it was a luxury watch. All the successful architects wear them. It's part of the image. Then a design conference in Barcelona. The European perspective is critical in today's global market. Each time, I found ways to make it work, picking up extra projects, cutting my own expenses, dipping into my pre-marriage savings. Throughout it all, Morgan was affectionate and appreciative. He brought me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, left sweet notes in my laptop bag, and bragged about my financial acumen to our friends. When I expressed worry about our progress on the debt, he would massage my shoulders and remind me that his career was building steadily, that patience would be rewarded. "We're investing in our future," became his mantra, and I wanted to believe him. 3 years into our marriage, I was offered a significant promotion at work, senior investment advisor with a substantial salary increase. The new role would require longer hours and occasional travel, but would dramatically accelerate our debt payoff plan. "That's wonderful news," Morgan said when I told him, uncorking a bottle of champagne. "You deserve this recognition." Yet, as I outlined how my increased salary would help us eliminate his debt within 2 years, I noticed a flicker of something in his expression. Discomfort? Resentment? It disappeared so quickly I convinced myself I'd imagined it. The promotion changed our dynamic in subtle ways. At social gatherings, Morgan began introducing me with qualifiers. "This is my wife Eliza, the financial wizard. She keeps our ship running while I handle the creative side." There was nothing overtly wrong with these introductions, but something about his tone suggested a need to establish separate territories, as if my financial contribution needed to be balanced against his artistic contribution. When I traveled for work, he became increasingly difficult to reach. "Sorry I missed your call. I was in a design charrette," or "My phone died during the client meeting." The explanations were always plausible for someone in his profession, and I never had reason to doubt them, until Jessica Davis joined his firm. Jessica Davis arrived at Morgan's architecture firm like a summer storm, sudden, disruptive, and impossible to ignore. Morgan mentioned her casually over dinner one evening, describing her as the new project manager with an impressive portfolio from New York. He spoke with professional admiration, nothing more, and I thought little of it. Then her name began appearing with increasing frequency in his conversations. Jessica suggested this innovative approach to the lakefront project. "Jessica knows this amazing Vietnamese restaurant near the office. Jessica thinks we should pitch for the downtown renovation." I first met her at the firm's holiday party, a lavish affair at the Chicago Art Institute that Morgan insisted we attend despite our tight budget. "It's essential for networking," he explained, as I calculated how many extra hours I'd need to work to cover the new outfit he deemed necessary for the event. Jessica was striking, tall and confident with a sleek black bob and designer clothes that somehow looked effortlessly elegant rather than ostentatious. She greeted me with perfect professionalism, her handshake firm and her smile measured. "Morgan talks about you constantly," she said, though something in her tone suggested those conversations might not have been entirely flattering. "All good things, I hope," I replied with a lightness I didn't feel. "Of course," she said smoothly. "He's very proud of your financial expertise." Throughout the evening, I noticed how naturally Morgan and Jessica moved in the same circles, sharing inside jokes with colleagues and finishing each other's sentences when discussing projects. They operated as a unit, professionally symbiotic in a way that made me feel like an outsider looking in. "You two work well together," I observed on the drive home, careful to keep my tone neutral. "We're a good team," Morgan agreed easily. "Jessica understands my vision in a way that's rare in this industry. It's refreshing not to have to explain every creative decision." The comment stung more than it should have. There had been a time when Morgan eagerly shared his designs with me, sketching concepts on napkins at dinner and valuing my input. That intimate sharing had gradually faded, and I hadn't noticed its absence until now. Work consumed more of Morgan's time after Jessica's arrival. Late nights at the office became routine, often extending into dinners to discuss project details while they were fresh. Weekend charrettes, intensive design workshops, suddenly required his presence when previously he'd managed to complete such work during regular hours. I buried my unease beneath additional work hours, focusing on my own career advancement and our debt reduction plan. The promotion I'd received came with challenging new responsibilities that provided a convenient distraction from the growing distance in my marriage. By our 5th anniversary, I had managed to pay down nearly $40,000 of Morgan's original debt through careful financial management and by channeling a significant portion of my salary toward the payments. What should have been a shared victory felt strangely hollow. "We're halfway there," I told Morgan over an anniversary dinner I had cooked at home to save money. "Halfway?" he questioned, looking up from his phone. "The debt," I clarified. We've paid off half of it. At this rate, we'll be completely free in another 18 months. That's great, Eliza, he said, his enthusiasm seemingly genuine as he reached for my hand. I don't know how I got so lucky to find someone so dedicated. Yet even as he praised my dedication, his phone continued to buzz with notifications he checked surreptitiously when he thought I wasn't looking. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. That night, as Morgan slept, I did something I'd never imagined myself doing. I checked his phone. The guilt of invading his privacy battled with a growing certainty that something was wrong. The evidence was subtle but unmistakable. Dozens of text exchanges with Jessica at all hours. Messages that started professionally but occasionally veered into personal territory. Plans made without my knowledge. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. Nothing explicitly inappropriate, no declarations of love or plans for rendezvous. But the cumulative weight of those exchanges told a story of emotional intimacy that excluded me. I returned the phone to his nightstand, my hands shaking. Was I overreacting? Creating problems where none existed? Morgan and I had barely had time for real conversations in months, both busy with demanding careers. Perhaps this connection with Jessica was merely the natural camaraderie of colleagues who spent long hours together. Rather than confronting him with unsubstantiated suspicions, I made a decision to reinvest in our marriage. I arranged weekend getaways, initiated date nights, and made conscious efforts to show interest in his current projects. Morgan responded positively to these overtures, seeming grateful for the attention and reconnection. For a few months, things improved. Morgan came home earlier, shared more about his work, and appeared more present in our relationship. I began to think my concerns had been unfounded, a product of insecurity and exhaustion. Then came the Portland project. It's a major opportunity, Morgan explained, his enthusiasm palpable as he described the sustainable community center his firm had been invited to bid on. If we win this contract, it could put us on the national map. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely happy for his potential breakthrough. When is the pitch? That's the thing, he said, his expression growing careful. The client wants an immersive presentation. Jessica and I would need to fly out to Portland for 4 days to prepare the site analysis and preliminary concepts. 4 days, alone with Jessica. The unease I'd suppressed came rushing back. Could someone else from the firm go instead? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Morgan looked surprised, then slightly offended. Jessica is the project manager and I'm the lead designer. We're the obvious team for this. Of course, I backtracked quickly. I was just thinking about the expense. Flights, hotel rooms. It's a business expense, he said dismissively. The firm covers it, I nodded, swallowing further objections. What could I say? That I didn't trust him with a colleague? That I was jealous of their professional rapport? Either would make me sound petty and insecure. When do you leave? I asked instead. Monday morning. 3 days later, I drove Morgan to the airport, planting a lingering kiss on his lips before he joined the security line. Knock them dead, I said with forced brightness. I'll call you tonight, he promised. The call never came. A text arrived instead, apologizing for the late hour and explaining they'd been working intensively with the local contractors. The same pattern repeated the following night. By the 3rd day, the messages had grown shorter and less frequent. On D. The 4th morning, I received a call, not from Morgan, but from my bank's fraud department. Mrs. Winters, we're verifying a charge on your joint credit card. There was a purchase at Elysium Jewelers in Portland for $4,200 yesterday. Is this authorized? My mind raced. Morgan and I had agreed not to make purchases over $500 without discussing them first, a necessary boundary given our debt repayment plan. Can you tell me what was purchased? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. The merchant category is fine jewelry, the representative replied. Given the amount, our system flagged it for verification. Thank you for checking, I said mechanically. Yes, the charge is authorized. After ending the call, I sat motionless at our kitchen table. Morgan had spent over $4,000 on jewelry, an amount that would set our debt repayment plan back by months. And he had done it without a single word to me. The possibilities spun through my mind. An anniversary gift? My birthday was months away, and our anniversary wasn't for another 10 weeks. A spontaneous present to apologize for his recent emotional distance? Possible, but increasingly out of character for the Morgan I'd been living with lately, or a gift for someone else. When Morgan returned that evening, tanned and energetic despite the supposedly grueling work trip, I waited for him to mention the purchase. He described the project in detail, how impressed the clients had been with their presentation, the strong likelihood they would win the contract. Not a word about Elysium Jewelers or any extravagant purchase. How was working with Jessica? I asked, watching his face carefully. Something flickered in his expression, caution, perhaps, or calculation. Professional as always, she has excellent rapport with clients. As he unpacked, I noticed him carefully removing his toiletry bag rather than emptying it into the bathroom as he normally would. When he went to shower, I made another decision I never thought I'd make. I opened the bag. Inside, tucked into an inner pocket, was a small velvet pouch. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a pair of diamond earrings. Tasteful, expensive, and definitely not intended for me. I replaced the earrings exactly as I'd found them and returned to our bedroom, my mind racing with possibilities, each more painful than the last. When Morgan emerged from the shower, I studied him with new eyes. This man I had married, whose debt I had shouldered, whose career I had supported through countless sacrifices. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing my intense gaze. "Just tired," I replied, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. Big project at work. That night, as Morgan slept beside me, I lay awake contemplating my options. I could confront him immediately, demand explanations about the earrings and his relationship with Jessica. But my analytical mind, the same one that had created detailed debt repayment schedules and investment strategies, knew that emotional confrontations rarely yield complete truths. Instead, I decided to gather information methodically, just as I would for a complex financial analysis at work. If my suspicions were unfounded, I could put them to rest without damaging our marriage with accusations. And if they weren't, I needed to be prepared. The next morning, I called my sister Diana, the only person I trusted completely. "I need your honest opinion," I said after explaining the situation. "Am I creating a problem where there isn't one?" Diana's silence spoke volumes before she finally answered. "Eliza, you've been making excuses for Morgan's behavior for years. The real question is, why don't you think you deserve better?" Her words struck with the force of revelation. How long had I been diminishing myself to accommodate Morgan's needs, dreams, and failures? The financial sacrifices were quantifiable. Thousands of dollars in debt payments, extra hours worked, opportunities declined to maintain our debt repayment schedule. But the emotional investment was incalculable. Years of prioritizing his career over mine, of accepting his excuses, of ignoring subtle dismissals of my contributions. "What would you do?" I asked her. "I'd protect myself," Diana answered without hesitation, "financially and emotionally." After our call, I took a personal day from work, something I rarely did, and began taking stock of our financial entanglements. Our mortgage, the remaining $40,000 of Morgan's debt that I'd been paying, our joint credit cards and bank accounts. For years, I had managed these as shared resources, never distinguishing between his obligations and mine. That stopped today. I opened a separate bank account at a different institution, one Morgan had no relationship with. I transferred a portion of my savings, money I had earned before our marriage and kept in a separate account, creating a financial cushion independent of our joint resources. Next, I contacted the credit card companies to remove myself as an authorized user on accounts originally opened in Morgan's name. These practical steps brought unexpected emotional clarity. Each action was a reclamation of the autonomy I had gradually surrendered during our marriage. By afternoon, I felt more centered than I had in months, perhaps years. When Morgan texted that he would be working late, again, I replied with casual acceptance. The time alone was precisely what I needed to continue my financial disentanglement. That evening, I also did something I had been postponing for months. I accepted a lunch invitation from Robert Chen, the CEO of a sustainable investment firm, who had been trying to recruit me since my promotion. I had repeatedly declined, citing loyalty to my current company. The real reason was that a position with Robert's firm would require occasional international travel, something I had avoided, out of consideration for Morgan. As I sent the email accepting the lunch meeting, I felt a curious lightness. I wasn't committing to leaving my job. I was simply exploring options, expanding possibilities. The mere act of considering my own professional future independent of Morgan's needs felt revolutionary. Over the next 2 weeks, I maintained an outward normalcy while inwardly preparing for various possible futures. I documented our financial history, creating spreadsheets that tracked my contributions to Morgan's debt, joint expenses, and household costs. I researched housing options I could afford on my salary alone. I scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney, framing it as an information-gathering session to understand my rights and responsibilities. Throughout this period, Morgan remained distant, often returning home late smelling of unfamiliar perfume thinly disguised by mint gum and freshly applied cologne. The Portland project had been secured, a professional triumph he celebrated with colleagues rather than with me. His texts during the day grew sporadic, his explanations for Lady nights increasingly vague. The Morgan who had once charmed me with his focused attention now barely noticed my presence. When we did speak, his tone carried a subtle condescension, as if my financial concerns were pedestrian compared to his creative vision. He began referring to the debt as your repayment obsession, rather than acknowledging it as his responsibility, that I had voluntarily shouldered. You could ease up on the payment schedule, he suggested one rare evening when we were both home for dinner. We're not going to starve if it takes an extra year to clear it. The interest accumulation makes a significant difference over time, I explained, though we'd had this conversation many times before. Every month we delay costs us hundreds of dollars. There's more to life than optimizing interest payments. Eliza, he said with a dismissive chuckle. Sometimes I think you forget that. The comment stung, reinforcing the growing narrative that I was somehow deficient for prioritizing financial responsibility, the very quality that had kept us afloat, and steadily reduced his substantial debt. My lunch with Robert Chen provided a striking contrast to these interactions. He spoke to me as a valued professional, seeking my insights on sustainable investment strategies and describing a position that would utilize my full capabilities. I've followed your work for 2 years, he told me. The way you integrate environmental impact metrics into traditional investment analysis is exactly the innovation our clients are seeking. By the end of our 2-hour conversation, Robert had outlined a role with a 40% salary increase, creative input on developing new financial products, and the opportunity to present at international conferences. Take some time to consider, he said as we parted. We're prepared to be flexible on the start date if you decide to join us. I drove home in a daze, not from indecision, but from the stark realization of how profoundly I had been undervaluing myself, professionally and personally. The woman Robert Chen described, insightful, innovative, valuable, seemed disconnected from the accommodating wife who had been gradually erasing herself to maintain Morgan's comfort and illusions. That evening, as if the universe were determined to crystallize my awakening, I overheard a phone conversation that removed any remaining doubt about Morgan's fidelity. I had arrived home early, quietly entering through the garage as a thunderstorm muffled the sound of my car. Morgan was on our back porch, his voice carrying through the partially open door as he spoke on his phone. I know, but we need to be patient," he was saying, his tone intimate in a way it hadn't been with me for months. "Eliza's been handling all the finances. I need to understand exactly where things stand before I make any moves." A pause as he listened. The earrings were just the beginning. Once the debt is cleared, there's the equity in the house, her retirement accounts. Another pause. "I know, Jess. Soon, I promise." My blood turned to ice water. The conversation continued, but I didn't need to hear more. The picture was devastatingly clear. Morgan was waiting for me to finish paying off his debt before leaving, maximizing his financial benefit from our marriage before discarding it for a relationship with Jessica. I retreated silently to my car and drove aimlessly for hours, rain pounding on the windshield as I processed the magnitude of this betrayal. It wasn't just the infidelity, though that cut deeply. It was the calculated exploitation, the realization that I had become a financial resource to be drained before being discarded. When I finally returned home, I had achieved a clarity that bordered on transcendent. Morgan greeted me casually, asking about my late meeting with practiced disinterest. I answered with equal casualness, offering no explanation for my absence. That night, as he slept beside me for what I knew would be one of the final times, I made my decision. I would not confront him, not yet. I would not give him the opportunity to construct new lies or manipulate my emotions. Instead, I would complete one last financial transaction, the final payment on his debt. Not because he deserved this parting gift, but because finishing what I started would allow me to walk away with absolute clarity about who I was and who he had revealed himself to be. The following morning, I logged into our financial accounts and scheduled the final payment on Morgan's debt, $39,876.43, the exact amount remaining from his original $80,000 burden. The system asked me to confirm this substantial transaction, and I clicked yes without hesitation. An automated message appeared. "Congratulations. Your payment has been processed. This account is now paid in full." I took a screenshot of the confirmation, a digital record of a commitment fulfilled. Then I forwarded it to my personal email, evidence I might need later. This wasn't just a financial transaction, it was the conclusion of a chapter in my life. With Morgan's debt cleared, I turned my focus to implementing the plan I had developed over the past 2 weeks. The first step was securing my future employment. I called Robert Chen and accepted his offer at the sustainable investment firm, negotiating a start date 4 weeks out. This timeline would give me precisely enough space to execute the remaining elements of my strategy. "We're delighted you're joining us, Eliza," Robert said. "I'll have HR send over the formal offer letter today." Next, I contacted the real estate agent I'd met with during my information gathering phase. Andrea specialized in temporary housing for professionals in transition, her diplomatic way of describing her niche helping people through divorces. "The furnished condo on Lakeshore Drive is still available," she confirmed. "It's a 6-month lease, perfect for giving you time to decide on your next permanent move." I paid the deposit immediately, securing a place Morgan knew nothing about. The monthly rent was higher than I would have chosen under normal circumstances, but the flexibility and immediate availability justified the premium. More importantly, the building had excellent security, key card access, and a 24-hour doorman. With housing secured, I moved to protect my most irreplaceable possessions. While Morgan was at a day-long client meeting, I carefully gathered items of sentimental and practical value. My grandmother's jewelry, important documents, irreplaceable photographs, and the external hard drive containing my professional portfolio. These I transported to a safety deposit box at my new bank. I also began the subtle process of reclaiming financial territory. I removed my direct deposit authorization at work, redirecting my paychecks to my new individual account. I contacted our utility companies, explaining that I would no longer be responsible for payments after the current billing cycle. For accounts that couldn't be immediately separated, I documented the final date of my financial responsibility with detailed notes and confirmation numbers. Throughout these preparations, I maintained an outward normalcy that required more acting skill than I knew I possessed. I continued making dinner on the evenings Morgan came home, asking about his day with practiced interest, even as my internal landscape had transformed completely. Each night as he slept, I refined my exit strategy, adjusting timelines and confirming details. Morgan, absorbed in his own deception, noticed nothing amiss. His late nights continued. His distraction when home remained constant. Occasionally, he made gestures toward connection, bringing home my favorite dessert or suggesting a weekend movie. But these moments felt performative, like an actor hitting his marks before the real scene he was waiting to play. 2 weeks after clearing Morgan's debt, I received the formal offer letter from Robert Chen's firm. The compensation package exceeded even his initial discussion. In addition to the substantial salary increase, they offered a signing bonus, relocation assistance, though I hadn't yet mentioned my impending move, and equity options that would vest over 3 years. The position would include quarterly travel to their European offices in London and Copenhagen, with potential expansion to their new Singapore branch. I signed the contract immediately, scanning and emailing it back within hours. Something about making this commitment felt like throwing a rope across a chasm, securing my connection to a future professional identity unconstrained by Morgan's needs and expectations. That evening, Morgan arrived home early for the first time in weeks, carrying takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of champagne. "Let's celebrate," he announced, his smile wider than I'd seen in months. "What are we celebrating?" I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral. "The Portland project just got expanded. The client wants us to design 2 additional buildings on the campus." He popped the champagne with a flourish. "It's a significant fee increase, and I'm being named lead architect for the entire development." "Congratulations," I said, accepting the glass he offered. "That's a major achievement." Morgan raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings and expanded horizons." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. We were indeed both headed toward new beginnings, though not the shared future his toast implied. "The best part," Morgan continued, his eyes bright with an excitement I once would have found infectious, "is that I'll be spending more time in Portland. The client wants someone on site regularly during the initial phase." "How regularly?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "At least 3 days a week for the next few months." He took a long sip of champagne. "Jessica will handle things here while I'm gone." I nodded, as if considering the logistics of this arrangement rather than recognizing it for what it was, the perfect cover for their relationship to advance while maintaining appearances. "That's quite a commute," I observed. "Actually," Morgan said, his tone deliberately casual, "I've been thinking it might make sense to get a small place there, just for these few months. More cost-effective than hotels, and the firm would cover most of it." The pieces were falling into place exactly as I had suspected. The Portland apartment would be their sanctuary, a space away from watchful colleagues and inconvenient spouses. Jessica would undoubtedly be a frequent visitor, those diamond earrings sparkling under northwest skies. "Seems sensible," I replied, maintaining my composure despite the anger simmering beneath. "When would this start?" 2 weeks, Morgan said, looking relieved at my apparent acceptance. "We're still working out the details." 2 weeks. The timing was almost poetic in its perfection. My own plans were set to culminate in exactly 10 days. As we ate dinner, Morgan became uncharacteristically attentive, asking about my work and future goals with an interest he hadn't shown in months. The performance was so convincing that for a brief, disorienting moment, I found myself responding genuinely, sharing thoughts about sustainable investment trends I found exciting. "You've always been brilliant at the financial stuff," he said, reaching for my hand across the table. "I couldn't have managed any of this without you." The statement, intended as a compliment, crystallized everything wrong with our relationship. To Morgan, my financial stuff wasn't a career worthy of respect or a skill deserving admiration. It was a support service that enabled his ambitions. I wasn't a partner, I was infrastructure. I extracted my hand gently, using the excuse of reaching for my water glass. "It's what I do," I said simply. Later that night, Morgan initiated physical intimacy for the first time in weeks. I found myself faced with an unexpected ethical dilemma. Refusing would signal a change in our dynamic that might alert him to my plans. Accepting felt like a betrayal of myself. I chose a middle path, responding with just enough engagement to avoid suspicion while maintaining an emotional distance that protected my dignity. Afterward, as Morgan drifted to sleep with the satisfied expression of someone whose world was unfolding according to plan, I slipped from the bed and went to the guest bathroom. Under the harsh fluorescent light, I studied my reflection, searching for traces of the woman who had once believed so completely in the partnership we were building together. She was gone, replaced by someone with clearer eyes and a stronger spine. The transformation wasn't just about discovering Morgan's betrayal. It was about recognizing how completely I had subordinated my own worth to accommodate his vision of our life together. As I returned to our bedroom, my phone vibrated with an email notification. It was from the property manager of my new condo, confirming that the keys would be available for pickup in 7 days. Morgan stirred slightly at the sound, but didn't wake. I silenced my phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. 7 more days of careful pretense, of strategic preparation. Then I would execute the final phase of my plan, not with dramatic confrontation or emotional ultimatums, but with the same methodical precision with which I had managed our finances and paid down his debt. Morgan had underestimated me in every possible way. Soon he would understand exactly how profound that miscalculation had been. The week before my planned departure unfolded with surreal precision. Morgan, energized by his Portland project and what he believed was his imminent freedom, became almost giddy, staying home more often, initiating conversations about future plans, even suggesting a weekend getaway to reconnect before the Portland commuting begins. "I've missed us," he said one evening, his sincerity so convincing that for a fleeting moment, I questioned my certainty about his betrayal. "With the debt finally behind us, I feel like we can start fresh." I smiled and agreed, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. There was a particular cruelty in his performance, this pantomime of recommitment precisely when he planned to leave, this pretense of valuing what he had already discarded. Each day, I continued my methodical preparations. I scheduled a mail, forwarding service to my new address. I digitized important documents and secured them in encrypted cloud storage. I gradually relocated clothing and personal items Morgan rarely noticed, taking them to my new condo in small batches that wouldn't be missed from our shared closets. I also documented our financial history with almost obsessive thoroughness, not just the debt payments, but every transfer from my personal savings to cover joint expenses, every bonus allocated to our mortgage rather than my retirement, every financial sacrifice I had made while Morgan maintained his carefully curated image of success. This accounting wasn't merely practical preparation for potential legal proceedings. It was an exercise in reclaiming my narrative. For years, Morgan had minimized my financial contributions while maximizing his creative ones. This documentation was evidence, to courts perhaps, but more importantly to myself, of the true economic balance of our partnership. 5 days before my departure, an unexpected complication arose. Morgan announced over breakfast that his parents planned to visit the following weekend, the exact time I had scheduled my move. "They want to see us before I start the Portland commute," he explained. "Mom mentioned something about helping us prepare freezer meals to make things easier while I'm away." The irony was almost too perfect. His parents would arrive expecting to help maintain our home in their son's absence, only to find that home irreparably fractured. I had always liked Morgan's parents, who had treated me with genuine warmth. The thought of them becoming collateral damage in our marital collapse filled me with regret. "Maybe they should postpone," I suggested carefully. "Give you time to settle into your new routine first." Morgan frowned. "They've already booked flights. Besides, Mom's really excited about the Portland project. She's been telling everyone her son is designing a major sustainable development." Of course she had. Morgan's mother had always been his most dedicated publicist, transforming his every professional step into a triumph worthy of celebration. I wondered briefly how she would frame our divorce to her bridge club. An unfortunate casualty of her son's brilliance, perhaps, or the failure of a wife who couldn't match his creative vision. "I'll make sure the guest room is ready," I said, knowing I would be gone before they arrived. That evening, I contacted my sister Diana, the only person who knew the full extent of my plans. "I need a favor," I explained. "Can you come help me? Move on Saturday? I've hired movers for the furniture, but I could use moral support for the personal items." "Absolutely," she replied without hesitation. "What time should I be there?" We arranged for her to arrive at 9:30 a.m., when Morgan would be at his standing breakfast meeting with a contractor who specialized in sustainable materials. The movers would come at 9:30, giving us a 3-hour window before Morgan typically returned home. With Diana's help secured, I turned to the final piece of my exit strategy, the letter I would leave for Morgan. I had drafted and discarded a dozen versions, each feeling either too emotional or too clinical. The challenge was finding language that maintained my dignity while ensuring he understood the finality of my decision. After several more attempts, I produced a version that felt right. "Morgan, by the time you read this, I will have moved out and begun divorce proceedings. I have paid off your debt in full, as promised. That commitment is now complete, as is our marriage. I know about the affair with Jessica. I know about the diamond earrings. Most importantly, I know about your plan to wait until the debt was cleared before leaving. I heard your conversation on the porch 2 weeks ago. I've accepted a new position with Chen Sustainable Investments, effective immediately. I've removed myself from our joint accounts and utility bills as of today. I've taken only what is indisputably mine, though further property division will be addressed through legal channels. Please direct any communication to my attorney, whose contact information is attached. She is instructed not to discuss reconciliation or mediation, as my decision is final. I deserve better than to be used and discarded. So did our marriage." Eliza, I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it in my desk drawer, where it would remain until Saturday morning. The words felt both insufficient and excessive for ending 8 years of shared life, but perhaps no communication could adequately capture the complex reality of a relationship's demise. 4 days before my departure, another unexpected development occurred. Jessica Davis appeared at our home. I was working remotely that day, preparing transition documents for my current position, when the doorbell rang shortly after noon. Opening the door, I found Jessica standing on our porch, her expression shifting from expectation to surprise when she saw me. "Eliza," she said, recovering quickly, "I thought Morgan would be home for lunch today." "He had a client meeting," I replied, maintaining a neutral tone despite the adrenaline suddenly coursing through my body. "He didn't mention you'd be stopping by." Jessica hesitated, clearly calculating her response. We have some Portland materials to review. He must have forgotten. I studied her with new clarity. Her perfectly tailored blazer, the subtle diamond studs in her ears, not the extravagant pair Morgan had purchased, but elegant nonetheless. The confident posture of someone accustomed to navigating complex situations. "Would you like to come in and wait?" I asked, surprising myself with the invitation. "I'm working from home, but I can make coffee." Something like wariness flickered across her features before she nodded. If it's not an imposition, the meeting shouldn't run much longer. I led her to our living room, offering a seat on the sofa while I went to prepare coffee. As I measured beans and heated water, I considered the strange tableau we created, the wife and the mistress, engaging in domestic pleasantries while both knew, though Jessica didn't know I knew, that they were competing players in Morgan's elaborate deception. Returning with 2 mugs, I found Jessica examining the architectural books on our coffee table, many of which I had given Morgan as gifts over the years, researching obscure titles he coveted but wouldn't purchase for himself. "Morgan has excellent taste," she commented, accepting the coffee I offered. "In some things," I agreed, the double meaning clear to me if not to her. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Jessica attempted conversation. Morgan mentioned, "You work in finance?" "Investment analysis," I clarified. "Specifically sustainable development portfolios." Interest flickered in her eyes. Genuine, not polite. "That's a growing sector. Are you seeing significant returns compared to traditional investments?" The question launched a surprisingly engaging discussion about environmental impact bonds and green infrastructure financing. Jessica was clearly knowledgeable, asking insightful questions about risk assessment models and regulatory considerations. "The Portland project actually incorporates some innovative financing," she explained, professional enthusiasm momentarily overriding her awkward position in my living room. "We're utilizing carbon offset credits to subsidize the green roof systems. For 20 minutes, we talked as colleagues might, the personal entanglement temporarily superseded by shared professional interests. It was a disorienting experience, finding intellectual common ground with the woman who had participated in betraying me. As our conversation reached a natural pause, I found myself asking the question that had lingered since discovering the affair. "Does it bother you that he's married?" Jessica's composure faltered, coffee mug freezing halfway to her lips. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I think you are," I said quietly. "I know about you and Morgan. I know about the Portland plans." She set her mug down carefully, studying me with a new calculation. "Morgan said your marriage was effectively over, that you were together in name only, focused entirely on your financial concerns rather than emotional connection. The familiar narrative, casting me as the cold, money-obsessed wife to justify his pursuit of passion elsewhere, stung despite my preparation for exactly this revision of our history. An interesting perspective, I replied, maintaining my composure. Especially given that I've spent the last 3 years paying off his $80,000 debt. That doesn't strike me as the action of someone emotionally disconnected from their partner." Jessica's surprise was evident. Morgan had clearly neglected to mention this particular detail in his reimagining of our marriage. $80,000? He said the debt was from joint expenses, home renovations. I laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. The debt existed before we married. Student loans, credit cards, personal loans from a gambling phase he'd rather forget. I paid the final installment last month. Jessica absorbed this information, her professional poise momentarily abandoned as she processed its implications. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you should understand who you're really involved with," I said, surprising myself with the realization that beneath my anger lay a strange sense of obligation. Not to protect this woman who had participated in destroying my marriage, but to speak a truth Morgan had carefully obscured. Jessica set her coffee mug down with deliberate care, her composure returning despite the revelations I'd shared. "I appreciate your candor," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But I think there are aspects of your marriage that Morgan has experienced differently." "I'm sure there are," I agreed. "Perspective is a fascinating thing. From my perspective, I've spent years supporting his career, managing our finances, and paying down his debt while he cultivated a professional image that excluded acknowledging my contributions." Jessica's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in her eyes. A flicker of recognition, perhaps, or concern. "Morgan speaks very highly of your financial acumen." "I'm sure he does. It's been quite useful to him." I leaned forward, slightly. "Tell me, has he mentioned what happens after the debt is cleared? Any specific plans he's shared about your future together?" The slight tensing of her shoulders told me everything I needed to know. Morgan had indeed outlined a future with Jessica, likely the same idyllic vision he had once painted for me, complete with professional collaboration, creative synergy, and life unburdened by financial constraints. "Our professional relationship is evolving," she said diplomatically. "The Portland project presents opportunities for both of us." "I'm sure it does," I replied, "just as our marriage presented opportunities for Morgan. The question is whether you'll find yourself making the same investments I did, with similar returns." Before Jessica could respond, we heard the sound of a key in the front door. Morgan entered, his expression freezing when he saw us together in the living room. "Jessica," he said, his tone conveying surprise and something close to alarm. I thought, "We were meeting at the office." "I had the impression we were meeting here," she replied, a new coolness in her voice as she gathered her portfolio. "Eliza has been kind enough to keep me company while I waited." Morgan's eyes darted between us, clearly trying to assess what might have been discussed. "We should get going," he said to Jessica. "The client call is in 30 minutes. "Actually," Jessica replied, "I think I'll head back to the office alone. I need to review some figures before the call." She turned to me with perfect professionalism. "Thank you for the coffee, Eliza. Our conversation was illuminating." She left without waiting for Morgan, her quick footsteps on the porch steps, followed by the sharp sound of her car door closing. Morgan remained standing in our living room, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his posture. "What did you talk about?" he finally asked. "Investment strategies for sustainable development," I replied truthfully, though incompletely. Jessica is quite knowledgeable about green financing models. Relief visibly washed over him. "She's brilliant professionally," he agreed, relaxing. Slightly. "The Portland client specifically requested her involvement." "I'm sure they did," I said mildly, rising to take our coffee mugs to the kitchen. "Don't you have a client call to prepare for?" Morgan hesitated, clearly torn between pursuing the conversation to ensure damage control and maintaining the pretense that Jessica's visit had been purely professional. "Right," he said finally. "I should get back to the office." "Have a productive afternoon," I called after him, the normalcy of the exchange almost comical given the seismic shifts occurring beneath our marital surface. After Morgan left, I sat at our kitchen table, processing the unexpected encounter. Meeting Jessica had clarified something important. She wasn't a villain in this story, merely another player Morgan had drawn into his carefully constructed narrative. The real issue wasn't her involvement with my husband. It was Morgan's fundamental pattern of using others to advance his own interests while minimizing his obligations. The confrontation, though unplanned, had strengthened my resolve. Seeing Morgan's panic at finding Jessica and me together, his immediate concern about what truths might have been revealed, confirmed that my decision to leave was not just justified, but necessary. I returned to my work, finalizing transition, documents for my current position, and responding to emails from Robert Chen about projects I would be handling in my new role. The ordinary professional tasks felt grounding amid the emotional turbulence of preparing to dismantle my marriage. That evening, Morgan came home with takeout from an expensive Italian restaurant and a bouquet of peonies, my favorite flowers, though he had needed to check my Pinterest board to remember this detail, a fact I discovered when his search history appeared on our shared iPad. "Peace offering," he said with a charm that once would have melted my reservations. "I'm sorry about the mix-up with Jessica today. I should have mentioned she might stop by." I accepted the flowers with appropriate gratitude, placing them in a vase while Morgan served the pasta. Throughout dinner, he was attentive and engaging, asking about my day with apparent interest and sharing amusing anecdotes about a client meeting. Had I not overheard his conversation with Jessica on the porch, had I not seen the diamond earrings, I might have been swayed by this performance of reconnection. "I've been thinking about us," he said as we finished our meal. "With the debt finally cleared and the Portland project secured, we could take that trip to Spain you've always wanted. Maybe in the fall, when the first phase of construction is complete." The suggestion, planning future travels when he intended to leave within weeks, demonstrated either profound cognitive dissonance or exceptional comfort with deception. Perhaps both. "That's an appealing thought," I replied, non-committal. "We've been through a rough patch," Morgan continued, reaching for my hand across the table. "The stress of the debt, both of us focusing so much on work, but we've turned a corner now." I allowed him to hold my hand, studying his earnest expression with clinical detachment. The man I had married was an excellent architect, but an even more skilled illusionist, creating believable facades that obscured structural realities. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "It's been a challenging period." Morgan squeezed my hand, his smile warming. "But we've made it through. That's what matters." For a moment, I wondered what motivated this renewed attention, whether it was simply maintaining appearances until his planned departure, or if my unexpected meeting with Jessica had triggered some competitive instinct to secure his position with both women. Perhaps it was even simpler. Morgan needed my continued financial management until he established his new life in Portland. Whatever the motivation, the performance continued through the evening. Morgan suggested watching a documentary series I'd mentioned wanting to see. He massaged my shoulders while we sat on the couch. He asked thoughtful questions about my career aspirations, listening with apparent attention to my responses. By the time we went to bed, I felt as though I had spent the evening with a skillful actor playing the role of devoted husband. Every gesture correct, every line delivered with convincing sincerity. Yet the entire production was hollow at its core. 2 days before my planned departure, I received an unexpected call from Vanessa Miller, a colleague at my current firm who had become a friend over the years. "I'm not sure if I should be telling you this," she began hesitantly, "but Morgan came by the office today asking about your recent projects and client relationships." I frowned, puzzled by this information. "Why would he do that?" "He said he was planning a career celebration surprise for you," Vanessa explained. "But something felt off about it. He was particularly interested in the Chen Sustainable account, asked if you were the primary contact, whether you'd mentioned any recent meetings with them." My blood ran cold as I processed the implications. Morgan must have seen something, and email notification, perhaps, or noted my lunch meeting with Robert Chen on our shared digital calendar. He was investigating my professional moves, specifically any connection to the firm where I had accepted a new position. "Did you tell him anything?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Just that client relationships are confidential," Vanessa replied. "I said I couldn't discuss specific accounts without your permission." He seemed frustrated but didn't push it. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "I appreciate your discretion." After ending the call, I immediately checked my computer security. Had Morgan accessed my email, reviewed my browser history? I couldn't be certain, but the timing of his renewed attentiveness at home and his inquiries at my office suggested he suspected something was changing. I spent the evening accelerating my preparations, moving more essential items to my new condo, and ensuring all important documents were secured. If Morgan was investigating, my window for a clean departure might be narrowing. The next morning, my final full day in our shared home, Morgan announced he needed to work late. "Major client presentation tomorrow," he explained over breakfast. "The team will probably be at the office until midnight finalizing the materials." "Good luck with it," I replied, relieved by his planned absence. This would give me additional time to complete my preparations without maintaining the exhausting pretense of normalcy. Once Morgan left for work, I moved through our home with heightened efficiency, gathering the last items I needed from our shared spaces. Photo albums my mother had created, kitchen equipment I had brought from my pre-marriage apartment, books that held personal significance. Each object is carefully evaluated for both practical and emotional value. By evening, my personal presence in our home had been subtly diminished, not enough for casual observation to detect, but a careful inventory would reveal the selective absence of items connected specifically to me rather than to us as a couple. I was placing the final items in my car when my phone rang, Morgan's mother calling from Arizona. "Eliza, dear," she greeted warmly. "I'm just confirming our arrival time for Saturday. Our flight gets in at noon. Will Morgan be able to pick us up, or should we arrange a car service?" My heart raced as I gripped the phone, the innocent question creating unexpected complications. Morgan's parents had always been kind to me, treating me with a warmth that sometimes felt more genuine than their son's affection. I hadn't considered how my departure would affect them or how I might navigate this particular conversation. "Patricia," I began, my mind racing for a response that wouldn't reveal too much while not actively deceiving her. "I think a car service might be best. Morgan's schedule has been quite unpredictable with the Portland project." "Of course, dear. We certainly don't want to add any pressure. How are you holding up with all his travel coming up?" "Richard and I, we're just saying how difficult these career transitions can be on a marriage." The concern in her voice made what I needed to say next even more difficult. "Patricia, I think it's best if you speak with Morgan about the weekend. There have been some changes in our situation that he should explain directly." A pause followed, the silence heavy with unasked questions. "Eliza, is everything all right? You sound strained." "I'm afraid I can't really discuss it right now," I said gently. "But Morgan should call you this evening." Another pause, longer this time. "I see," she finally replied, her tone shifting from warm concern to cautious formality. "Then I'll wait to hear from him." "Take care of yourself, Eliza." The conversation ended with awkward pleasantries, both of us aware that something significant remained unspoken. I immediately texted Morgan. "Your mother called about Saturday. I suggested she speak with you directly. Please call her tonight." His response came quickly. "Is everything okay? What did you tell her?" "Only that there have been changes you should explain directly. She deserves to hear it from you." I didn't specify what it was, but Morgan's next text suggested he had drawn his own conclusions. "We need to talk when I get home. Don't make any decisions until we've spoken." The message confirmed my suspicions. Morgan had discovered something about my plans, whether through investigating my work connections or perhaps noticing subtle changes in our home. The timeline had compressed. I needed to accelerate my departure. I called Diana immediately. "Can you come over now instead of tomorrow morning? I think Morgan suspects something." "I'll be there in 30 minutes, she replied without hesitation. "Should I bring help?" "No, just you. I've already moved most of the important things. I just need support for the final stage." While waiting for Diana, I contacted the moving company, offering a significant premium to move my scheduled pickup from tomorrow to tonight. Then I called Andrea, the real estate agent handling my condo. "Is there any possibility I could get the keys tonight rather than tomorrow? I'll pay whatever expediting fee is necessary." Andrea hesitated only briefly. Let me make some calls. The previous tenant is already out, and the paperwork is processed. It's just a matter of coordinating with the property manager. By the time Diana arrived, I had received confirmation that both changes were possible. The movers would arrive within 2 hours, and Andrea would meet me at the condo with keys by 9 p.m. Diana surveyed the half-packed living room with practiced efficiency. What still needs to be done? Bedroom, bathroom, and my home office, I replied. I've already packed most of it, but it needs to be loaded into my car. We worked in focused silence, Diana helping transport boxes while I made final decisions about what to take and what to leave behind. With each item I chose to take, my grandmother's quilt, the reading lamp I'd had since college, framed diplomas from my degrees, I felt a curious mixture of loss and liberation. Are you sure about this timing? Diana asked as we loaded the last box into my car. It seems rushed. Maybe you should stick with the original plan. I showed her Morgan's text. He knows something's changed. I don't want a confrontation. I want a clean break. Diana nodded, understanding the strategy. What about your letter? I'll leave it on the kitchen table with my keys. The movers will take the furniture I've designated, and I'll be gone before he returns. The movers arrived at 7:30 p.m., professional and efficient. Following my detailed instructions, they quickly loaded the specific items I had marked: my desk, my reading chair, bookshelves containing volumes that were indisputably mine, the small side table that had been a gift from my parents. I had been careful to select only furniture that had either belonged to me before marriage or been explicitly given to me as personal gifts. By 8:45 p.m., the moving truck was loaded and on its way to my new address. Diana and I did a final walkthrough of the house, ensuring I had left nothing essential behind. In the kitchen, I placed the envelope containing my letter and my house keys prominently on the table. Is there anything else you want to say to him? Diana asked, watching me place the envelope. I considered the question carefully. The letter says everything necessary. Anything more would just be an emotional release for me without serving a purpose. Diana hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you. This isn't easy, but you're handling it with incredible dignity. Thank you, I whispered, allowing myself a moment of vulnerability in my sister's embrace. For everything. We left the house separately, Diana returning to her home, me driving toward my new beginning. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced. Back at the craftsman bungalow Morgan and I had purchased in the heady early days of our marriage. The porch where we'd shared summer evenings, the garden I had carefully tended, the blue front door I had insisted on painting myself for good luck. So many memories, now sealed behind me like artifacts in a museum of a former life. When I arrived at the condo building, Andrea was waiting in the lobby, keys in hand. All set, she said cheerfully. The movers arrived about 10 minutes ago. They're waiting for your direction on furniture placement. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of practical decisions. Where to position the desk for optimal light, how to arrange the bookshelves, which kitchen cabinets should hold what items. The physical labor of establishing my new space provided welcome distraction from the emotional weight of what I had just done. By 11:30 p.m., the movers had departed, and I stood alone in my new living room. The space was sparsely furnished but functional. My reading chair positioned by the window overlooking the city, my desk set up in the alcove that would serve as my home office, my books arranged on shelves along the wall. It wasn't home yet, but it was mine, a space defined solely by my needs and preferences. My phone had been buzzing periodically throughout the evening. Text messages from Morgan had progressed from confusion. What's going on? Your mother seemed to think we're having Pearl to concern. Please call me when you get this to alarm. I'm heading home now. We need to talk. The most recent message, received just minutes ago, carried a different tone entirely. Where are you? What have you done? He had arrived home to find my letter and the selective absence of my presence from our shared space. the carefully constructed facade he had maintained, the pretense that our marriage was solid despite his plans to leave once his debt was cleared, had collapsed, leaving him to confront a reality he hadn't anticipated. I did not respond to his texts. Instead, I opened my laptop and composed an email to my attorney, confirming that I had left the marital home and was now residing at my new address. I attached photographs documenting the furniture and personal items I had taken, along with my detailed inventory of premarital possessions and gifts specifically designated to me during our marriage. As I worked, calls from Morgan continued to light up my phone. After the 6th consecutive call, I turned the device off completely. Whatever reaction he was having, anger, confusion, perhaps even genuine distress, was no longer my emotional responsibility to manage. I prepared for bed in my new bathroom, the routine simultaneously familiar and strange in these unfamiliar surroundings. As I brushed my teeth, I studied my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me appeared different somehow. Her eyes clearer, her posture more erect, her expression more settled than it had been in months, perhaps years. This wasn't the ending I had imagined when Morgan and I exchanged vows 8 years ago. Then, I had believed in the partnership we were building, the future we would create together. I had accepted his debt as part of that shared future, viewing its repayment as an investment in our collective life. Now I understood that what I had perceived as investment had actually been exploitation. My financial resources, my emotional labor, my professional skills, all deployed to advance Morgan's interests while he planned his exit strategy. The clarity of this understanding brought not bitterness but a strange peace. I had fulfilled my commitments, paid the debt, maintained our home, supported his career. That those commitments had been built on false premises was Morgan's failure, not mine. As I settled into bed, my familiar sheets now on a new mattress, in a new room, I allowed myself to acknowledge the full spectrum of emotions I had been managing so carefully during my exit planning. Grief for the marriage I had believed in, anger at Morgan's betrayal, anxiety about my uncertain future. But beneath these turbulent feelings lay something more solid, a foundation of self-respect reclaimed through decisive action. I had not allowed myself to become a passive victim in Morgan's narrative. I had recognized the truth of our situation and responded with strategic clarity, protecting my interests while maintaining my dignity. My phone, now charging on the nightstand, but still powered off, contained dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and texts from Morgan. In the morning, I would need to address these communications through my attorney, establishing the boundaries that would govern our interactions going forward. But tonight, in this quiet space that belonged only to me, I allowed myself to simply be present with my new reality. The marriage was over, the debt was paid, the future, uncertain as it might be, was mine to define according to my own values and aspirations. As I drifted toward sleep, my final conscious thought was not of Morgan or our failed marriage, but of the meeting scheduled for Monday with Robert Chen to discuss my first projects in my new role. Professional challenges, creative collaboration, financial rewards that would benefit me rather than subsidize someone else's ambitions. These would be the focus of my energy now. The weight I had carried for years, not just Morgan's financial debt, but the heavier burden of his emotional exploitation, had been set down at last. Whatever came next, I would face it standing tall, unburdened by obligations to someone who had never truly valued my worth. Morning arrived with tentative sunlight filtering through unfamiliar blinds. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't place myself in this new space. The ceiling angle was wrong. The ambient sounds were different from the neighborhood I had known for years. Then memory rushed back, bringing with it the full awareness of what I had done the night before. I had left my husband. I had walked away from 8 years of marriage. I had upended my entire life. Yet instead of panic or regret, I felt a surprising calm, the steadiness of someone who had finally aligned their actions with their truth. I rose and made coffee in my new kitchen, the routine both strange and comforting in these unfamiliar surroundings. Only after finishing my first cup did I power on my phone, bracing myself for the inevitable deluge. 27 missed calls, 43 text messages, 9 voicemails. All from Morgan, all in escalating states of confusion, anger, and disbelief. The most recent text, sent at 3:17 a.m., read simply, "This isn't over. We need to talk. I'm coming to your office Monday morning." I forwarded the message to my attorney, Sharon Winters, adding, "Morgan is threatening to appear at my workplace. Please advise." Her response came within minutes despite the early weekend hour. "I'll contact him directly with cease and desist. Have you notified your workplace security about potential disruption?" I hadn't considered this aspect of the situation, that Morgan might create a scene at my office, potentially damaging my professional reputation. The realization was jarring but clarifying. Even now, my first instinct had been to manage Morgan's emotions, to absorb the impact of his reactions rather than protecting my own interests. "We'll do so immediately," I replied to Sharon, then composed an email to our office facilities manager explaining that I was going through a divorce and my estranged husband might attempt to confront me at work. The message was factual and professional, without emotional details, requesting simply that reception be notified not to allow Morgan past the security desk. With these protective measures in place, I turned my attention to the voicemails. Most contained variations on the same themes: initial confusion, "What's going on? Where are you?" Followed by anger, "You can't just leave like this. This is insane." Progressing to bargaining, "Whatever you think is happening, we can work it out. Just come home so we can talk." And finally, in the messages from the early morning hours, a cold calculation I recognized all too well. "You've made a serious mistake, Eliza," his voice said in the final message, recorded at 4:26 a.m. "You have no proof of anything you've alleged in your letter. Taking furniture from our home could be considered theft. And as for your claim about paying my debt, those were marital obligations you voluntarily contributed to. I've already spoken with an attorney who confirms this perspective. If you want to avoid an ugly legal battle, call me by noon to discuss your return." The thinly veiled threats were so characteristic of Morgan's approach to conflict, the immediate attempt to reframe the narrative, to position himself as the reasonable party while casting me as irrational and legally vulnerable. 6 months ago, such tactics might have worked, might have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt and conciliation. Now, I simply forwarded the voicemail to Sharon with the message, "FYI regarding Morgan's current approach." Her response was immediate and reassuring. "Standard intimidation tactics. The financial documentation you've provided clearly establishes the premarital nature of the debt. As for the furniture, your inventory and photographs confirm you took only items that were indisputably yours." His attorney, if he's actually consulted one, is giving him poor advice, or he's misrepresenting that advice to pressure you. With my professional and legal bases covered, I turned my attention to establishing my new life. The condo required practical essentials, groceries, cleaning supplies, organizational tools for the spaces that still held packed boxes. I spent the morning shopping, filling my new refrigerator with food selected solely according to my preferences, choosing cleaning products for their effectiveness rather than their aesthetic appeal on open shelving. These mundane tasks carried unexpected emotional significance. For years, even grocery shopping had been a negotiated activity. Morgan preferred organic produce regardless of cost, insisted on particular brands of staples, and complained if I purchased what he considered inferior alternatives to save money. Now each item in my cart represented an unconstrained choice, a small declaration of independence. By late afternoon, I had transformed the condo from a collection of furniture and boxes into something approaching a home. Books lined the shelves, kitchen essentials occupied logical locations, my clothing hung in the bedroom closet. The space remained minimalist. I had left behind far more than I'd taken, but it was functional and, more importantly, wholly mine. As I was arranging framed photographs on a side table, my phone rang with Diana's number. "How's the new place?" she asked when I answered. "Getting settled?" "It's coming together," I replied. "Not exactly home yet, but getting there." "Morgan's been calling me," she said, her tone careful. "Demanding to know where you are, whether I helped you leave. He showed up at my house about an hour ago." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "Peter told him to leave or he'd call the police," she said, referencing her husband. Morgan started ranting about family loyalty and enabling destructive behavior. He seemed unhinged, Eliza. Not at all like the composed person we're used to seeing. The image of Morgan losing his carefully maintained control, the polished professional facade cracking to reveal the desperation beneath, was both concerning and validating. For years I had glimpsed aspects of his character that others never saw, the calculation behind the charm, the selfishness beneath the apparent generosity. Now others were witnessing what I had long experienced in private. "Are you and Peter okay?" I asked. "We're fine," Diana assured me. "But you should know he's actively looking for you. He called Mom and Dad, too." This news jolted me. "What did they say?" "That they love you and support whatever decision you've made," Diana replied. "Dad was actually pretty fierce about it. Told Morgan that if you left, he probably deserved it." Tears sprang to my eyes, not of sadness, but relief. My parents had always been politely reserved about Morgan, never criticizing him directly, but never demonstrating the warmth they showed toward Diana's husband, Peter. I had interpreted their restraint as simple personality differences, not recognizing it as the subtle judgment it apparently was. "I should call them," I said. "They'd like that," Diana agreed. "But they're not pressuring you. They just want you to know they're in your corner, whatever you need." After speaking with Diana, I called my parents, explaining the situation in broad strokes without delving into every painful detail. Their response was immediate and unambiguous support, offering practical help with my transition and emotional reassurance about my decision. "You've always had remarkable clarity, Eliza," my father said. "Even as a child. If you've determined, this marriage isn't viable, we trust your judgment completely." Their confidence bolstered my resolve as I continued settling into my new space. By evening, the condo felt significantly more personal. Art hung on walls, familiar objects occupied surfaces, the generic rental unit gradually transforming into a reflection of my tastes and priorities. At 7:30 p.m., my attorney called with an update. "Morgan's attorney contacted me this afternoon," Sharon informed me. "They're requesting a meeting to discuss reconciliation options before proceeding with formal divorce filings." "Reconciliation isn't on the table," I replied firmly. "I made that clear in my letter." "I conveyed that position," Sharon assured me. "However, a meeting might actually be beneficial from a strategic perspective. It would establish the tone for subsequent negotiations and allow us to present your documentation directly. Additionally, seeing you firm in your decision might help Morgan accept the reality of the situation more quickly." I considered her reasoning. "When will this meeting occur?" "Wednesday afternoon at our offices," she replied. "Neutral territory with professional parameters. I would be present throughout, and we would establish strict time limitations and agenda boundaries." The prospect of facing Morgan so soon after my departure sent a flutter of anxiety through my chest. Yet I recognized the practical wisdom in Sharon's suggestion. Avoiding direct communication would only prolong the process and potentially escalate. Morgan's attempts to contact me directly. "All right," I agreed. but I want it clearly established beforehand that reconciliation discussions are off the table. This meeting is solely to establish parameters for an amicable separation." "Absolutely," Sharon confirmed. "I'll send the communication tonight and copy you on all correspondence." After the call ended, I wandered to the condo's balcony, a small, outdoor space overlooking the city park below. The evening had turned cool, stars appearing in the darkening sky above the urban landscape. Pedestrians moved along the pathways, couples walking hand in hand, runners completing evening exercises, dog walkers pausing at benches. Watching this tableau of ordinary life continuing around me, I felt a curious sensation, a simultaneous awareness of my smallness within the larger human story, and the immense significance of the changes I had initiated in my own narrative. My personal earthquake had altered everything in my immediate experience, yet from this vantage point, I was simply another person navigating the universal complexities of love, betrayal, and self-discovery. The perspective was oddly comforting. Whatever pain and challenges lay ahead in finalizing my divorce, in establishing my new professional identity, in rebuilding my personal life, I was neither the first nor the last to walk this particular path. Countless others had faced similar crossroads and found their way forward. My phone buzzed with a text message. Not from Morgan this time, but from Robert Chen. "Looking forward to your first day Monday. The team is excited to welcome you, and I've scheduled one-on-one meetings with your direct reports throughout the week. Let me know if you need anything before then." The simple professional courtesy created a bridge to my future, a reminder that while one significant chapter was ending, another was beginning with equal significance. On Monday morning, I would walk into a new office, begin new projects, establish new professional relationships, all building on my capabilities, rather than subordinating them to someone else's ambitions. Morgan's debt was paid in full. My obligation to our failed marriage was complete. Whatever came next, including Wednesday's confrontation, I would face with the clear-eyed strength of someone who had reclaimed her own narrative. As night settled fully over the city, I returned inside, closing the balcony door on the life I had left behind and turning toward the one I was now creating for myself. Monday morning arrived with the brisk energy of new beginnings. I dressed carefully for my first day at Chen Sustainable Investments. A tailored charcoal suit with subtle emerald accents, professional without being severe. My wardrobe choices had once been influenced by Morgan's preferences. "That color washes you out," or "Shouldn't you wear something more distinctive for a presentation?" But today's selection reflected only my own judgment about appropriate business attire. The firm occupied 3 floors of a LEED-certified building downtown, its reception area featuring living green walls and furniture crafted from sustainable materials. Robert Chen himself greeted me in the lobby, his handshake warm and his welcome genuinely enthusiastic. "The team is eager to meet you," he said, leading me through security protocols and toward the elevator. "We've scheduled an informal breakfast gathering before your orientation sessions begin." The day unfolded with the pleasant intensity of new professional challenges, introductions to team members, overviews of current projects, detailed discussions of the firm's investment philosophy and client relationships. By mid-afternoon, my mind was thoroughly engaged with complex sustainability metrics and innovative financing structures, the personal turmoil of my weekend momentarily eclipsed by intellectual stimulation. It was during a brief break between meetings that reality intruded, a text from my sister that brought me sharply back to my personal situation. "Morgan showed up at your old office looking for you. Security wouldn't let him up. Vanessa just called me." My stomach tightened as I read the message. Despite my attorney's cease and desist communication, despite my notification to building security, Morgan had still attempted to confront me at what he believed was my workplace. The behavior revealed a disturbing disregard for boundaries and professional norms. I forwarded the information to Sharon, who responded promptly. This strengthens our position for Wednesday's meeting. His attorney has been notified of this incident. I strongly recommend documenting any further contact attempts. When I returned to my condo that evening, the security desk informed me that a man matching Morgan's description had inquired about me earlier that day. He said he was your husband and needed to drop off important documents, the concierge explained. Since you're listed as single on your residency application and had not authorized him as a visitor, we declined to confirm whether you lived in the building. I thanked the concierge for following protocol and requested that any future visits from Morgan be documented. Under no circumstances should he be allowed upstairs, I emphasized. I'm in the process of divorce, and his attempts to contact me should be directed through legal channels. The concierge nodded with professional understanding. We'll make note of it in our security system, Ms. Reynolds. Your privacy and safety are our priority. The use of my maiden name, a deliberate choice when signing my lease, struck me with unexpected emotional force. How long had it been since I'd been addressed as simply me, not as an extension of Morgan through our shared surname? The simple acknowledgement of my individual identity felt simultaneously foreign and deeply right. That night, as I prepared for my second day at the new firm, I received an email from Jessica Davis. The subject line read simply, "Information you should have." I hesitated before opening it, uncertain whether this communication represented further complication or potential clarity. Curiosity won out. Eliza, I debated whether to contact you, but after recent events, I believe you deserve to know the full situation. Morgan has been telling widely divergent stories, to me, to colleagues at the firm, to his friends. In some versions, you left without warning or justification. In others, you're having a mental health crisis, and he's desperately trying to get you help. In yet others, you've stolen joint assets, and he's pursuing legal remedies. What he hasn't mentioned to anyone is the debt you paid off or the financial support you provided throughout your marriage. After our conversation in your living room, I began questioning details of Morgan's narrative. When I pressed him about the debt, he became defensive and eventually admitted that yes, you had helped with some student loans, though he minimized the amount and your role in resolving it. I've also learned that his position on the Portland project is less secure than he represented. The client specifically requested another design lead due to concerns about Morgan's preliminary concepts. His frequent trips to Portland were primarily damage control, not the professional triumph. He described, "I'm not sharing this information to cause additional pain, but because I believe in professional integrity and basic honesty. Whatever existed between Morgan and me is over. I cannot build anything meaningful with someone who so casually misrepresents reality and uses others as financial safety nets. I wish you well in your new journey and apologize for any role I played, however unknowingly, in the dissolution of your marriage." Jessica Davis. I read the email twice, absorbing its implications. Jessica's communication revealed not just Morgan's continued pattern of deception, but also the unraveling of his carefully constructed professional narrative. The Portland project, the opportunity he had leveraged to create space for his relationship with Jessica while preparing to leave me, was apparently failing. His charming facade was cracking in all aspects of his life simultaneously. I drafted a brief, dignified response. "Jessica, thank you for sharing this information. While painful, clarity is ultimately valuable. I wish you well in your professional endeavors and appreciate your integrity in reaching out. Eliza Reynolds." The exchange brought unexpected closure to one aspect of the complex emotional landscape I was navigating. Jessica was neither villain or victim in this story, merely another person who had been drawn into Morgan's elaborate self-mythology before recognizing its fundamental dishonesty. Wednesday arrived with the leaden anticipation of an unavoidable confrontation. I met Sharon at her office 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting, reviewing our strategy and the documentation we would present. "Remember," she advised as we organized financial records and property inventories. This meeting is primarily for establishing procedural parameters. If Morgan attempts to veer into emotional territory or reconciliation appeals, I'll redirect the conversation. You're not obligated to engage with anything beyond the practical aspects of dissolving the marriage. I nodded, grateful for her clear boundaries and professional guidance. What should I expect from him? Sharon considered the question thoughtfully. Based on his communications thus far, likely an initial attempt at reconciliation, possibly followed by financial intimidation. If that fails, when those approaches prove unsuccessful, he may try to position himself as the injured party, perhaps even suggesting therapy or counseling as intermediate steps. Her assessment aligned perfectly with my understanding of Morgan's typical strategies: charm, first, then intimidation, followed by appeals to external authority or expertise. The predictability of these tactics, once identified, diminished their power significantly. At precisely 2:00 p.m., the receptionist announced Morgan's arrival with his attorney, Gerald Hoffman, a family law specialist known for representing high-earning professionals in contentious divorces. Sharon and I rose to greet them in the conference room, the formality of the setting establishing a professional tone for what might otherwise have been an emotionally charged encounter. My first glimpse of Morgan in 4 days was jarring. The polished architect with his carefully maintained appearance had been replaced by someone showing visible signs of strain. His normally impeccable hair slightly disheveled, subtle shadows beneath his eyes suggesting disrupted sleep, his typically relaxed posture now rigid with tension. Our eyes met briefly as he entered, his expression cycling rapidly through surprise, perhaps at my composed demeanor, calculation, assessing potential strategies, and finally settling into a carefully constructed concern that might have seemed genuine to someone who hadn't witnessed its rehearsal over years of marriage. "Eliza," he began, his voice modulated to convey both intimacy and restraint. Sharon intervened smoothly. "Let's begin with introductions for the record," she suggested, effectively interrupting whatever personal appeal Morgan had prepared. Sharon Winters, representing Eliza Reynolds. The formal use of my maiden name established an immediate psychological distance. Morgan's attorney followed suit with his own introduction, though Morgan himself seemed momentarily thrown by the procedural approach. As established in our preliminary communications, Sharon continued, today's meeting focuses exclusively on establishing parameters for an equitable dissolution of the marriage. Mrs. Reynolds has clearly indicated that reconciliation discussions are not on the agenda. Morgan shifted in his seat, the muscles in his jaw visibly tensing. "I think that's premature," he interjected. "Before diving into legal proceedings, Eliza and I should have the opportunity to discuss what's happened privately. This situation has escalated due to miscommunications and assumptions that could be resolved through direct conversation." The familiar strategy, positioning his perspective as reasonable while implying my actions were impulsive or based on misunderstanding, might once have made me question my own judgment. Now it simply confirmed the validity of my decision. "There's no miscommunication, Morgan," I said, my voice steady. "I discovered your relationship with Jessica, your plans regarding the Portland project, and most significantly, your intention to leave after I finished paying your debt. I heard your conversation on the porch. There's nothing to discuss privately." Morgan paled slightly, apparently not expecting such direct reference to his overheard conversation. His attorney placed a cautioning hand on his arm, silently advising restraint. "Regardless of personal matters," Hoffman interjected smoothly, "Mr. Winters has expressed concern about the removal of joint property from the marital home without prior agreement. This constitutes a potentially problematic first step in what could otherwise be an amicable process." Sharon smiled with professional politeness as she opened a folder containing my meticulously documented inventory. "We anticipated this concern," she replied, sliding copies across the table. You'll find a comprehensive list of items Mrs. Reynolds removed from the residence, along with documentation establishing their status as either premarital possessions or gifts specifically designated to her during the marriage. She turned to the second page. You'll also note photographs of each furniture piece taken before removal, along with provenance documentation for significant items. Mrs. Reynolds was exceedingly careful to take only what is indisputably hers. Morgan's attorney reviewed the materials with growing discomfort, clearly recognizing the thoroughness of our preparation. Morgan himself appeared increasingly agitated, his eyes scanning the inventory as his fingers drummed against the conference table. "This doesn't address the fundamental issue," he said finally, looking directly at me rather than at Sharon. "You left without warning, Eliza. After 8 years of marriage, don't you think I deserved a conversation rather than a letter?" Before I could respond, Sharon intervened. "Mrs. Reynolds made her decision after discovering your affair and your explicit plans to leave once she had completed paying your substantial premarital debt. Her communication method reflects the breach of trust these discoveries represented." Morgan flushed, glancing quickly at his attorney. "That's a mischaracterization of private conversations taken out of context. And regardless of any personal issues, there's the matter of financial entanglement. Eliza's letter referenced debt payments that were actually joint marital obligations, not personal loans. This was the moment I had anticipated. Morgan attempting to reframe our financial history to minimize his obligation and maximize his claim on our joint assets. Sharon nodded slightly, signaling me to proceed as we had discussed. "I've prepared a comprehensive financial accounting," I said, my voice steady as I opened my own folder. "This documents the origin of all debt present at the beginning of our marriage. $80,000 in total, consisting of your student loans, personal credit cards, and the gambling-related personal loan from your former roommate." I slid the documentation across the table. Dates, account numbers, original balances, all meticulously organized. The second section shows my systematic payment of these obligations over our 8-year marriage, with particular acceleration in the past 3 years. You'll note that these payments came predominantly from my separate earnings, often supplemented from my premarital savings, when your financial contributions were directed toward career development expenses. Morgan stared at the documents, his expression shifting from confidence to visible discomfort as he recognized the thoroughness of my records. His attorney leaned in, reviewing the financial timeline with growing concern. "These statements could be interpreted various ways," Hoffman offered cautiously. "Financial contributions in a marriage are rarely so clearly delineated." "I anticipated that perspective," I replied, turning to the final section of my documentation. This contains contemporaneous email exchanges between Morgan and myself regarding these payments, in which he explicitly acknowledges both the premarital origin of the debt and my role in resolving it. I highlighted a particularly damning message from 3 years prior, in which Morgan had written, "I don't know how I got so lucky finding someone willing to tackle my financial mistakes. Knowing you're handling those old loans and cards gives me the freedom to focus on building my career. I promise it will pay off for both of us eventually." Morgan's face had drained of color as he recognized his own words. "These were private communications," he said, his voice tight. "Taking them out of context to build some financial case against me is manipulative and dishonest." "On the contrary," Sharon interjected smoothly, "these communications establish a clear understanding between you regarding the nature of these financial obligations. There's nothing manipulative about documenting the truth." Hoffman, recognizing the strength of our position, shifted strategy. "While these financial matters will require further discussion, there's also the question of Ms. Reynolds's, abrupt career change. My client is concerned that this move to a competing investment firm may have involved proprietary information from her previous employer, potentially creating liability issues that could affect joint assets." The implication was both transparent and desperate, attempting to create a professional ethics cloud over my transition to pressure me into a less advantageous settlement. Sharon smiled thinly, clearly having anticipated this approach as well. Ms. Reynolds has signed all appropriate non-disclosure and non-compete agreements with her previous employer, who raised no concerns about her transition, she stated, producing the relevant documentation. Additionally, Chen Sustainable Investments operates in a specialized market segment that didn't directly compete with her previous firm. This attempt to manufacture professional ethics concerns is both unfounded and potentially defamatory. Throughout this exchange, I watched Morgan carefully. The composed, charming architect who had once commanded rooms with his confidence was visibly crumbling, his practiced facade giving way to the reality of his situation. His carefully constructed narrative of the creative genius temporarily, supported by his practical wife until his brilliance inevitably triumphed, was being systematically dismantled by documented facts. "This isn't about documentation or legal positioning," Morgan said finally, his voice taking on the injured tone I recognized from previous conflicts. "This is about our marriage, Eliza, about the life we built together. Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, there were moments of weakness with Jessica. But throwing away 8 years over what was essentially a flirtation seems extreme." The characterization of his relationship with Jessica, the diamond earrings, the planned Portland apartment, the explicit strategy to leave after my financial support was no longer needed, as essentially a flirtation might once have made me doubt my own perceptions. Now it simply confirmed the fundamental dishonesty that had defined our marriage. "Morgan," I said, meeting his gaze directly for the first time in the meeting, "I heard your conversation with Jessica on the porch. I know about your plans to leave once the debt was cleared. I know about your calculations regarding our joint assets. This isn't about jealousy or overreaction. It's about recognizing that our marriage has been based on fundamentally different understandings of partnership and honesty." Morgan's expression froze, the realization that I had heard his explicit strategy discussion clearly hitting him fully for the first time. His attorney leaned in to whisper something, but Morgan shook him off. "What exactly did you hear?" he asked, his voice unnaturally controlled. "Everything," I replied simply. "Your discussion of timing, waiting until I'd paid off the debt before making any moves. Your mention of accessing the equity in our home, and my retirement accounts after securing your financial position. Your promise to Jessica that it would happen soon." It was quite comprehensive. The color drained from Morgan's face as his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm, clearly trying to prevent whatever response was forming. For a moment, the conference room fell completely silent, the weight of exposed deception hanging in the air between us. Hoffman broke the silence with practiced diplomacy. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess to consult privately with our clients," he suggested, making eye contact with Sharon. "That seems wise," Sharon agreed. "Shall we reconvene in 15 minutes? As Morgan and his attorney left for a private consultation room, Sharon turned to me with quiet approval. "That went exactly as anticipated," she observed. "Your documentation is impeccable, and his reaction to learning you overheard that specific conversation tells us everything we need to know about its content." "What happens next?" I asked, feeling oddly calm despite the confrontation. "Based on their reaction, I anticipate a significant shift in negotiating position," Sharon explained. "Their initial aggressive stance is clearly untenable given the evidence. They'll likely move toward damage control and expedient resolution, rather than protracted conflict." Her prediction proved accurate. When Morgan and Hoffman returned 15 minutes later, the change in approach was immediately evident. Gone was the righteous indignation, replaced by a subdued pragmatism that suggested they had recognized the fundamental weakness of their position. After reviewing the documentation more thoroughly, Hoffman began, his tone now conciliatory. "We believe an equitable division of assets can be achieved without prolonged litigation. My client is prepared to acknowledge the substantial contribution Ms. Reynolds made toward resolving premarital debt and to reflect that contribution in our settlement proposals. The remainder of the meeting focused on establishing procedural timelines for asset valuation, property division protocols, and communication parameters. Morgan remained largely silent, offering only necessary responses to direct questions, his earlier attempts at emotional manipulation replaced by a resigned compliance with the legal process. As the meeting concluded, Morgan made one final attempt at private conversation. "Could I speak with you alone for a moment?" he asked as we gathered our materials. I glanced at Sharon, who nodded slightly, indicating the choice was mine. After a moment's consideration, I agreed. Briefly. When the attorneys had stepped outside, Morgan's carefully maintained composure faltered. "I never meant for things to end this way," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Whatever you heard that day, it wasn't the full picture." "It was clear enough," I replied evenly, "and consistent with patterns I should have recognized years ago." He shook his head, frustration evident in his expression. "You've built this narrative where I'm some calculating villain, but relationships are more complicated than that. Yes, I developed feelings for Jessica. Yes, I said things I shouldn't have. But what about your part in all this? The constant focus on finances, the way you measured everything in dollars and cents, treating our marriage like another investment to be optimized? The attempt to reframe our relationship history, to cast my financial responsibility as emotional deficiency, was so characteristic that it almost made me smile. Even now, facing the documented reality of his exploitation, Morgan was attempting to reconstruct a narrative where his behavior was justified by my failings. "That's an interesting perspective," I said calmly. "But I didn't pay off your $80,000 debt because I was focused on finances. I did it because I believed in us, in building a future together that wasn't burdened by your past mistakes. That wasn't about optimization. It was about love." Morgan flinched slightly at the word love, his eyes dropping to the conference table. "What I've learned," I continued, "is that believing in someone who doesn't value that belief isn't nobility. It's self-betrayal. I don't regret paying your debt, Morgan. I regret only that I didn't recognize sooner what that dynamic revealed about our relationship." I gathered my folder, tucking it neatly into my briefcase. "I wish you well with the Portland project and whatever future you're building. But that future won't include me or my financial support." As I turned to leave, Morgan called after me, a desperate edge in his voice. "The Portland project is falling apart, Eliza. The client is backing out. Jessica has requested reassignment. Everything is unraveling." I paused, absorbing this confirmation of what Jessica's email had suggested. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and found that I genuinely meant it. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in his professional struggles. "I could use your help," he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. "Your financial perspective, your organizational skills, just until I get things stabilized." The request, so characteristic in its assumption that my resources should remain available to him despite his betrayal, crystallized everything wrong with our relationship. Even now, facing the consequences of his actions, Morgan saw me primarily as a utility to solve his problems rather than a person he had deeply wounded. "No, Morgan," I said simply, "my help is no longer available to you." With those words, I walked out of the conference room, nodding to Sharon as I passed. She fell into step beside me, respecting my silence as we made our way to the elevator. "Are you all right?" she asked as the doors closed behind us. "Better than I expected," I replied, surprised to find it was true. The confrontation had brought neither vindictive satisfaction nor lingering pain, just a clear-eyed acceptance of what had been and what needed to be. The following months unfolded with unexpected smoothness. The divorce proceedings, which I had feared might become protracted and contentious, moved forward with relative efficiency. Morgan, perhaps recognizing the futility of fighting the documented financial history, agreed to a settlement that acknowledged my contribution to eliminating his debt and divided our remaining assets accordingly. My professional transition flourished, beyond my expectations. Robert Chen proved to be not just an excellent employer, but a genuine mentor, providing opportunities to lead innovative projects that aligned with my values. 6 months into my new role, I was invited to present our sustainable investment model at an international conference in Copenhagen, my first professional trip overseas and a validation of expertise that Morgan had consistently minimized. On a personal level, healing came gradually but steadily. I developed new friendships through a financial literacy group I joined, eventually becoming a volunteer instructor, helping women understand and take control of their finances. The condo transformed from a temporary refuge to a genuine home, each decorating decision and furnishing choice affirming my reclaimed autonomy. 1 year after leaving Morgan, I received an unexpected package at my office, a newspaper clipping, from Portland about the scaled-back opening of the community center project, accompanied by a handwritten note, Eliza. The project finally opened, though not as originally envisioned. The client reduced the scope by 60% after multiple design and budget issues. Morgan was removed as lead architect 6 months ago. I thought you might find this information relevant to your journey. I've accepted a position with a firm in Seattle, focusing on affordable housing projects, work with genuine impact rather than prestige. Your perspective during our brief conversation helped clarify what actually matters in both career and relationships. With respect and appreciation, Jessica Davis, the note prompted reflection, but not regret. According to mutual acquaintances, Morgan had eventually sold our former home at a significant loss and relocated to Phoenix, where he'd taken a mid-level position with a commercial architectural firm, a step down from his previous role, but perhaps better aligned with his actual capabilities, rather than his self-mythology. As for me, the aftermath of paying off Morgan's debt and walking away from his betrayal had transformed into something unexpected. Not just survival, but genuine flourishing. The financial expertise that Morgan had dismissed as obsession with dollars and cents had become the foundation of both professional success and personal mission, helping others recognize and prevent financial exploitation in their own relationships. 2 years after our divorce was finalized, I purchased a waterfront condominium overlooking Lake Michigan, the kind of property Morgan and I had once dreamed of acquiring someday, when his career inevitably skyrocketed. I bought it solely with my own resources, the mortgage approval resting on my individual income and excellent credit score, my signature alone on all documentation. On my first evening in this new home, I stood on the balcony watching sunset paint, the water with golden light. The path that had brought me here, through betrayal, calculated exploitation, and profound disillusionment, was not one I would have chosen. Yet standing in this space that represented not just financial independence but complete self-determination, I felt an unexpected gratitude for the journey. I had paid off Morgan's $80,000 debt, believing it was an investment in our shared future, only to discover he planned to discard me once my financial utility was exhausted. But karma had other plans indeed. Morgan had lost everything he valued: his prestigious position, his professional reputation, his carefully constructed image of success. I had gained something far more valuable than the money I'd once devoted to his debt. I had reclaimed my worth, not as measured by someone else's validation, but as defined by my own standards, values, and achievements. In the end, that was the truest balance sheet of all. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.